Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am so incredibly thrilled you're here today because we are taking what is, honestly, one of the most dense and complex legal frameworks in the entire Constitution, Indian citizenship, and we're going to transform it into a totally clear, visually structured, and just fascinating narrative. We're literally going to map out exactly how a nation defines its very own people. So I want you to think about this. Who exactly is an Indian? I mean, it seems incredibly simple on the surface, right? But as you're going to see, the answer to this one fundamental question actually shapes everything, from your individual rights to massive issues of national security. It's the ultimate boundary line between those who truly belong to the state and those who are, well, just passing through. And that's the main hook that's going to drive our entire explanator today. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, citizens, aliens, and domicile. Second, constitutional rules during partition. Third, the Citizenship Act of 1955. Fourth, how to acquire citizenship. And finally, the Assam Accord and the CAA. Starting right off with Section 1, Citizens, Aliens, and Domicile, defining belonging. Before we can even talk about getting citizenship, we really have to understand who actually belongs to a state. It helps to think of a nation like a giant house. In this analogy, a citizen is basically a family member. They get to enjoy full rights, they get a say in how the house is run, they can vote, they can even hold the highest office in the land, like the presidency. But of course, they also owe strict duties to the household, like paying taxes and showing loyalty. Now, an alien, on the other hand, they're more like a tenant renting a room on the roof. They absolutely have to follow the rules, but they don't get a say in how the household is run. And legally speaking, aliens can actually be classified as friendly or enemy, which just depends on whether India is at war with their home country. And let me tell you, that severely impacts their legal protections, especially against things like arrest and detention. So branching off of that, a really crucial concept to grasp is domicile. Now, domicile isn't just where you happen to be living right now. It is your physical residence, coupled with a very clear, proven intention to live there indefinitely. And listen, here is a massive misconception we need to clear up right off the bat. In India, domicile is strictly national. There is absolutely no such thing as a UP domicile or a Rajasthan domicile. You are domiciled in India as a whole country. This is without a doubt a foundational pillar for national unity. All right, moving on to Section 2, Constitutional Rules During Partition. This was essentially a constitutional band-aid. And this brilliantly illustrates what happened when India gained independence back in 1947. The borders were completely porous, and millions of people were displaced. It was chaotic. So the initial citizenship rules written into the Constitution, they were never actually meant to be permanent. Looking at the timeline, in July 1948, a permit system was introduced just to try and track and control this massive flood of people crossing the borders. By November 26, 1949, when the Constitution was drafted, the specific articles dealing with citizenship were enforced immediately. That's months before the rest of the Constitution even commenced on January 26, 1950. The government simply had to know, right then and there, who belongs to the new republic. So, these temporary constitutional articles were designed to target very specific groups of people. Article 5 covered those who were already living in India with domicile. Article 6 dealt with the millions who had just migrated from Pakistan. Article 7 is actually pretty fascinating. It covered what we call reverse migrants. These were people who initially fled to Pakistan, realized it was a mistake, and then came all the way back seeking refuge. And finally, Article 8 covered persons of Indian origin who were living abroad, like the large communities in East Africa. But keep this in mind, the Constitution explicitly left the final, permanent power to regulate citizenship directly to Parliament. Which brings us to Section 3, the Citizenship Act of 1955, a permanent framework. So, as expected, Parliament soon stepped in to craft a permanent, comprehensive framework to figure out how someone actually becomes an Indian citizen moving forward. And it turns out there are 5 core methods to acquire Indian citizenship. And we can easily remember this with an awesome mnemonic, BRAND. That's birth, registration, acquisition of territory, say if India were to formally integrate new land, naturalization, and descent, BRAND. It's literally the structural backbone of Indian citizenship law. Let's look closer at Section 4, how to acquire citizenship, and how those borders started tightening. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing how, over time, India's borders have drastically tightened up. Pre-1987, it was incredibly simple. If you were born in India, you were a citizen. Period. Full stop. But due to heavy migration, especially in border states like Assam, the law had to tighten. From 1987 to 2004, the rule changed so that at least one of your parents had to be Indian. And post-2004, it became incredibly strict. Now both parents must be Indian, or one must be Indian and the other simply cannot be an illegal migrant. So yeah, the days of simple automatic birthright citizenship are completely over.
So what happens if you're an Indian citizen working abroad, let's say in Portugal, and you have a child? Well, that falls under citizenship by descent. But post-2004, the steps for this are highly specific. First, the parent has to officially declare that the child holds no foreign passport. Then, they must register the birth at an Indian consulate within exactly 1 year, no exceptions. And here's the kicker. Once that child turns 18, they actually have to officially declare their own intent to remain an Indian citizen.
Now, for foreigners with absolutely no Indian heritage who are looking to naturalize, the math on this is incredibly steep. 12 years. That means they have to have lived in India for 11 out of the previous 14 years. And crucially, they have to be there for one full, uninterrupted, continuous year immediately prior to submitting their application. On top of all that residency math, they also have to be of good character and have adequate knowledge of at least one language listed in the 8th schedule of the Constitution. But wait, there is a totally fascinating exception to this. The government actually has the power to completely waive that strict 12-year naturalization rule for extraordinary individuals. Just imagine a top-tier scientist or a world-renowned philosopher seeking refuge in India. If they have rendered distinguished service to human progress, world peace, art, or science, the government can just fast-track their citizenship. It's a really pragmatic loophole designed specifically to welcome exceptional global talent. Let's move to and see how this builds into our final section, Section 5, the Assam Accord and CAA, Modern Realities. So let's talk about the Assam Accord. This was signed to address a massive, incredibly complex migration crisis that stemmed from the 1971 war, which of course created Bangladesh. Now, to try and balance humanitarian concerns with the very real anxieties of local residents, some strict cutoff dates were established. Basically, those who arrived before January 1, 1966 were regularized and granted citizenship. However, anyone arriving after March 25, 1971 was legally subject to detection and deportation. It was essentially a firm legal line drawn in the sand to manage an unprecedented historical flood of people. And this brings us right up to the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019, or the CAA, which modified these historical rules. Now, strictly looking at the parameters from our source material, the CAA essentially fast-tracks citizenship for specific non-Muslim religious minorities fleeing persecution from 3 specific countries: Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh. On the other hand, the source notes the intense criticisms the act faced for specific exclusions. Namely, it excludes Muslims, Jews, and atheists, and it also leaves out refugees from other neighboring nations that have their own histories of conflict, like Sri Lanka and Myanmar. Regardless of where you stand, the law remains a deeply significant modification to that original 1955 act. So, we've journeyed all the way from the chaotic border crossings of 1947 right into the complex, highly political landscape of modern India. The laws have completely shifted from simple geography to strict bloodlines and very specific dates. So I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. As global migration shifts and our borders continue to evolve, how will the definition of an Indian citizen adapt next? Who will the Constitution recognize as the family members of tomorrow? Thank you so much for exploring this with me on The Explainer. Keep questioning the structures around you, and I'll see you next time.